Part 7. Living Honestly. Internal and External Fallout of Honesty. Defending the Faith. Obviously, there are many parts of Christianity I just don't think I can believe anymore. But I'm searching through the rubble to salvage any remainder of truth because I'm also not on board with the naturalistic rationalism of the angry atheists who are just as certain and intrusively evangelical as their Christian opponents. When the experts fail. I always felt safe in Christianity because I knew it was all true, and that if any of the evil non-Christians ever started to persuade me and pull me into the deep end of the pool to drown me with their lies, I could just bring their arguments to one of the good guys on our team who could dive in to pull me back to safety. And yet, I find myself swimming out here just fine, saddened to look back and see that my self-proclaimed lifeguards can only scream to me from safety because what we were doing before, as fun as it was, wasn't really swimming. It was just waiting. These are not statements of arrogance. Those who learn how to swim are not inherently smarter nor better than those who don't. Unfortunately, even long-term pastors find facts in my earlier pages that they have never run into before. Did you? If so, I think that's a shame. Shouldn't the people who taught us theology and church history have known their theology and church history better than this silly piano teacher who did this research and wrote this book as a side compulsion in just 10 months while maintaining a marriage, raising 6 kids and 8 pets, running multiple businesses, writing a second book, working on my own therapy, staying connected to my friends, leading multiple meditative groups, maintaining my own hobbies of writing, reading, and music, and yes, still attending church services. God only knows what I would have found if I had a salary from my church to do it full time. Shouldn't my pastor or seminary textbook authors have known and presented these things to me? On the contrary, I still have a hard time getting them to engage to this day. Maybe it's just my off-putting personality, and their version of Jesus doesn't engage with Samaritans like me. If you can find a way to be honest and palatable with them, and you can get more than the non-answers I've predicted at the beginning, please report back and I'll apologize for my ignorance. Because unlike Paul, who said, "Even if we preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let us be under God's curse," I am not so certain I will never gain new information or change my mind. Defense of scholars. The real problem behind this disappointment might be the assumption that pastors have expertise outside of becoming pastors. As a former pastor, I can assure you that becoming a pastor has a lot to do with compliance, networking, and the desperation of the denomination, but almost nothing to do with insight or trustworthiness. Indeed, some of us are insightful and trustworthy, but some of us are also funny, musical, or athletic. Those qualities didn't really play into our ordination, and to the extent that they did, the last 3 were far more relevant than the first 2. If there is a universal qualification for a leader in biblical Christianity, it's probably the presupposition that the Bible is true. So the statement, "I asked a pastor about the Bible," is often akin to, "I asked a ghost hunter about Casper," because lifelong dedication to a topic does not necessarily result in knowledge on that topic. Christians would do well to resist assuming that a spiritual authority has any authority regarding the Spirit, even if they eloquently utilize an esoteric vocabulary. Sadly, this is also true of Bible scholars. I, too, used to trust Bible scholars until I learned that's not a real thing. As it turns out, the phrase, "this man is a theologian and Bible scholar," is similar to the phrase, "that kid's a genius." Even though there is such a thing as a true genius, it's someone who has scored 180 or higher on the Mensa IQ test, almost no one with the title is one. Troublingly, a true scholar is merely a student who has received a scholarship. So most true Bible scholars have earned the title simply by being unable to afford their education. Even more troublingly, the people who have studied the Bible the most are often not Christian at all. To be fair, I would assume that most Bible scholars are Christians for the same reason that I would assume most Quran scholars are Muslims. Most people outside the religion don't care to waste their lives studying someone else's obviously flawed and demonstrably irrelevant holy text. But in my experience, the most insightful Bible scholars tend to not be Christians for the same reason that the most insightful Quran scholars are not Muslims. They are free to be honest about what they observe without an imperative to force the book into coherence, nor maintain acceptance within the community. Defense of Christianity. I've spent a lot of time on Christian apologetics, which is the defense of the faith. I've taken courses on the topic, and I've lived the courses for nearly 4 decades. I've read and taught many of the books. Some of my favorites have been Mere Christianity, More Than a Carpenter, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, New Evidence That Demands a Verdict, The Case for Christ, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, The Problem of God. I wouldn't be surprised if each one of those authors, doctors, lawyers, and theologians, is smarter than I am. They would each obliterate me in a debate, minus the dead ones, but even then, my IQ is just not that high. In fact, rereading those books, I still find each of them romantically compelling and some of the points convincing. Not preponderance of evidence convincing or beyond a reasonable doubt convincing, but that seems like a decent point from their perspective convincing, or that sounds as sweet and confident as every other religion convincing. The topic of God doesn't really seem so definitive anymore. Even if he doesn't exist, the topic is still at least as fascinating as Santa Claus. Where did he come from? How did the legend endure? If he's a blatant lie, how has he spawned the undisputed most wonderful time of the year? What does this say about our species? Messiah or myth, no matter. I have so many questions, which just makes apologetics all that much weirder. Defense of the faith? It wasn't enough to just provide support for your beliefs? I'm sure many Christians would say that's all it really is, but that is neither how it is stated nor how I experienced it. Christian apologists were the specialized forces in the army of God, who were all out defending the faith against the principalities and powers that would squelch the good news and get people thrown in hell. Defense of peace. Now that I'm no longer enlisted in that army, I can't seem to find the maraud of atheist apologists against whom the Christians must defend themselves. In fact, it now occurs to me that not only do I not know any atheist apologists, and I know several Christian apologists, but almost the entire audience for Christian apologetics is Christians, whose maybe brittle faith tends toward crumbling on its own, even without an imminent army of atheist evangelists. Granted, there are enemies of Christianity, but I don't see proportionately more of them than the enemies of any other worldview. There's just a lot of haters in general, and some of them have some pretty legitimate complaints. At some point, I realized that all the debates I watched between atheists and Christians were hosted by Christians. They were the content creators, paying atheists to come debate undebatable topics, and claiming victory each time the atheist failed to prove a negative. I don't recall watching a single atheist conference when they hired a Christian apologist for the purpose of proving them wrong, but perhaps this is merely my ignorance. Then I remembered that the supposedly defeated atheists often surprised me with how unaffected they were by their loss. They were neither angry nor existentially gutted. They just walked away with the same indifferently satisfied air that I leave my workplace at the end of the day. It seems like after the world's greatest apologists gave their defense of the only one true faith, everyone in attendance, including their opponent, should have invited Jesus into their heart. But I never once saw that happen. Of course, many Christians would cite the extremely rare example of someone coming to Christ at one of those debates, a tale I heard and never have seen. And they would claim no one ever made a decision to leave Christ at one of those debates. But first of all, I would bet that's wrong. Probably a lot of people decided to leave Christ, but since there's no counterpart to the sinner's prayer, no one ever got to make their undecision public at the anti-altar. Second of all, leaving Christianity, not because of personal offense, but because of the weight of the evidence, isn't really something you choose. It often just kind of slowly happens to you. So I would now guess that however many people had seeds of righteousness sown in their hearts, many more had seeds of doubt sown. Or maybe I'm the first. Then I recalled hearing several atheists claim they would never debate a Christian again because it was all a counterproductive waste of time. At the time, it sounded like they were just bad sports. But if I take them at their word, instead of overlaying a caricatured villainous persona on them, I can see how being a paid punching bag in an unwinnable faux debate could get tiring, especially for the most talented thinkers and orators in their field. Surely they felt they had more productive things to do with their time than help produce more Christian propaganda. Maybe they weren't running in cowardice, but just abstaining in boredom, like they claimed. Defense of atheists. Furthermore, it's now interesting to me that Christians engage in this flurry of work to keep Christians Christian, but I see no such effort by atheists who are concerned that atheists are going to lose their atheism. In fact, I see precisely the opposite. In my experience, atheists generally discourage other atheists from attempting to deconvert Christians. In fact, I often see atheists promoting Christian rituals for those who find value in it, and they are some of the greatest proponents of humanitarian kindness and general well-being, regardless of who is behind it. Meanwhile, Christians often fight against charitable organizations that are doing God's work if that work does not benefit them or their brand. They fight against public services and most government agencies that are trying to help kids who don't have parents or are single parents or underprivileged citizens, the people James refers to as orphans and widows in their distress. Instead, Christians often direct their efforts toward audience retention, even to the detriment of any Jesus-ish efforts to help the needy and the poor, the underprivileged, the orphans and widows, the meek and mourning, the persecuted and poor in spirit. Sadly, I've seen far more churches that have a paid media team than a functioning food pantry, or any such mechanism of non-incestuously self-serving, quote, ministry. Of course, these are all broad generalizations. Not all churches suppress charity any more than all atheists attend Christian churches. But I do know more atheists who support church than attack it, just as surely as I know vastly more ministries that serve themselves than serve their community. Some churches do provide real value, but in my experience, their greatest ministry to their community is usually their mere existence. On this topic, I would note that the church's flagship weekly event, where they accept volunteer labor, solicit donations, and receive the attention and praise of their parishioners while avoiding paying taxes into their community, they refer to this as a church, quote, service, an Orwellian term if ever there was one. Other, quote, ministries, from the Latin word ministerium, which means service or care for, are largely comprised of the classes they invite their screwed-up community to attend in order to be fixed. We're here to inform you how you're wrong. You're welcome. I think almost all pastors have even preached this complaint about a lack of Christ-like love in the majority of other churches, not theirs. Wherever you attend, your church is different, and you're blessed to be in one of the good ones. But we could probably agree that many, if not most, Christian institutions would have a hard time proving they provide as much value as the local Mormon church, Rotary Club, or local parks department, except that the church often counts, quote, fellowship among their benefits, though it seems preposterous to take credit for other people's friendships. Furthermore, I would seriously argue that accused atheists like me are more pro-Christian than the Christians who reject me, since I am only opposed to their brand of Christianity that claims we're right and you're all wrong. That still leaves me very much in favor of all the rest of the thousands of brands of Christian, which I largely opposed back when I was a you're all wrong Christian. Defense of icons and flip-flopping. As humans are prone to do, I now find that all those apologetics books support my current worldview, rather than the nearly opposite one I held when I read them the first several times. Now they seem to clearly lay out the idea that there was probably a guy named Jesus who was the goat at starting a movement. The right guy at the right time, with the right message and the right demeanor, who died the right way, gaining the right followers, with the right political connections, in the right government. He was the Michael Jordan of monotheistic movements, and no one else will ever be able to compare because the game has changed too significantly since he played. Apologies to my fellow Michael Jordan fans for the disrespect, since we have proof of his miracles. Perhaps Jesus is to the Holy Roman Empire what Taylor Swift is to pop music. The talent and the legitimacy doesn't really matter because the real magic is what the system can do with the icon, not what the icon can do to the system. They are two amazing empty vessels, both probably confused about their significance, though Taylor probably gets bonus points for participating in the system willingly. Jesus couldn't play arenas until he was dead. The apologetics books prove to me that Christianity is the most recent evolution of some of the world's most important ideas. We started with pantheism, then polytheism, then monotheism, then Christianity, then Protestantism, and then the fractalization of denominations. Each step of the way, the God character supported, followed, led, the trend of moving our species toward individual sovereignty, with a lowercase s, since we already had the capital S since pantheism. But unlike before, I am now troubled by some of these apologetics books. As just one example, the title, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, now strikes me as a bit narrow-minded. Demands? Really? Like, there's no other valid way to look at that evidence. And verdict? Really? Like an unchangeable declaration. Do we have any such declarations about anything in history? The author seems a bit overconfident for a 2,000-year-old murder trial. He could have had some humility and called it ideas that support a hypothesis. But his ability to buy into his hyperbole is probably what made him such a good lawyer. Update. Crap. After looking it up, that story doesn't check out either. Not only did Jocelyn Josh McDowell not abandon a successful law career out of a compulsion to use his argumentation skills in apologetics, he never even graduated from nor attended law school, but dropped out while thinking about it at a community college in Michigan and instead got a Bachelor of Arts from a Christian college, then a Master's of Divinity from a different Christian college. That's our great skeptic lawyer hero, and another one bites the dust. Predictably, I know dozens of Christians who lean on this book even more than the Bible as the greatest pillar of their faith, and are convinced that its contents would convince even the greatest skeptic, as long as they're open-minded to obvious truth rather than pursuing their own worldly pleasures. And yet, I don't know a single unbeliever who read the book and became a Christian as a result, though I'm willing to believe that such people do exist. It seems that even though Christianity is supposedly self-evidently and provably true, no book or collection of books is sufficiently reliable to bring people into Christianity. And yet, as Christians know so well, there are a host of books that can and do turn a Christian away from the Christian God. Thus our history of book burning, avoidance of non-Christian media, and fear of university. It seems like truth should work in the opposite direction. Update number 2. 3 months later, I add this unsolicited revelation. Despite Lee Strobel being hailed as the former atheist and foremost apologist who made Christianity's favorite courtroom-level case for Christ, I can find no evidence that he was ever an atheist, as he claimed, but an agnostic, violent drunk who, according to his testimony, found God after his wife converted and gave him an ultimatum to stop his hedonistic lifestyle. Several interviews also strongly imply that he was a serial cheater, though I thankfully haven't heard any explicit admission. I'd rather not. So I have to believe a massive factor in his personal case for Christ was a looming divorce case. After conversion, God called him to sacrifice his career for a more lucrative gig at a megachurch, while he struggled as an author until his book Case for Christ became more lucrative than his preaching gig, at which point God called him to sacrifice his pulpit ministry. To date, Strobel has published 45 Christian books, 29 of the titles beginning with The Case For, including Heaven, Miracles, Faith, Grace, and a whole series in the vein of The Case for Christ for Kids. That doesn't mean he's being insincere or wrong or that there is no God. It does mean I've been misled about Lee's credentials and the bias of his testimony. It seems he is nowhere near the fair-minded judge his brand implies, following the evidence wherever it leads. To be fair, the titles The Case for Christ and Evidence That Demands a Verdict both present themselves as biased, one-sided attempts to convict a jury of their peers rather than an open exploration of possibilities or testing of hypotheses. I don't know where the actual skeptic Christian apologists are, but it's starting to feel like perhaps the phrase is an oxymoron. Update 3. My church leaders bolstered my faith and sidelined my doubts when they frequently talked about people like Jocelyn McDowell, Lee Strobel, and Dr. Francis Collins, supposed atheists who converted to Christianity after studying the historicity of the Bible. The explicit moral of the story was that any honest researcher inevitably realizes that Christianity is true. While it's true that several of our favorite examples were never as anti-God as their fantastical testimonies claim, surely many of them have reached their conclusions honestly. Unfortunately, I found it to be shockingly more common that non-Christian theologians were formerly card-carrying members of good Christian churches. Like me, they often graduated from seminary and had sincere ministries of their own. This phenomenon is so ubiquitous that I'm not even going to list names here, cherry-picking my favorite examples, like my church picked a handful of supposed ex-atheists. No, this homework is yours, if you dare. Make a list of atheist Bible scholars, maybe the most hated, or if you prefer, the most even-handed. Then listen to them talk about their background. Almost all of them will sound like me, and maybe like you. They're ex-Christians. not ones who needed to leave to follow their sin, but believers who stumbled upon information their seminary left out. They struggled to hold tighter to Jesus by studying harder, but the quicksand of facts made it worse the more they resisted. Had they stopped searching for the Christian rebuttals, they may have salvaged their faith, but the belief that the truth would set them free is exactly what freed them of the beliefs that they wanted to hold. Of course, I'm not making the reverse Christian claim that any honest seminary student will deconvert. After all, Mormons have their seminaries, where the majority of earnest students will come out as Mormon. And Scientologists pride themselves on their scientific studies. It's practically their whole religion. You or I could probably even write a curriculum that studies Santaology for years without leading someone to question his existence. But it does seem that all such belief systems share with Christianity the imperative to avoid forbidden texts, people, and ideas. That's probably why ex-Scientologists, ex-Mormons, and people like me are necessarily quarantined and removed like lepers once our leaders realize we've partaken of the forbidden materials and haven't successfully deployed their only antidote. Ignore that stuff and believe harder. Defense of God. I still agree with Nietzsche. The death of the God character is a terrifying prospect. I don't know that we're ready for it. I'm not sure I'm ready for it. I think humans need to acknowledge that there is a broader perspective, a higher authority and greater truth than the one which any of us possesses individually, or even our particular tribe, and probably our species. No matter how smart we become, consensus still isn't truth. It seems we still must attend to a higher voice, because each time we've elevated ourselves to that position, we've had our clearest glimpses of very real hell, which awaits us all, unless we aim with all our might for heaven. Even then, it's a slim shot, unless we stay humble, worshiping no one other than the omniscient not me, lest we fall into the trap of the Tower of Babel. So, our salvation is by works and by faith, by hope, through love and humility. What we'll earn by missing the mark is extinction, but the reward of a higher pursuit is the perpetuation of this beautiful, fragile thing called life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Romans 6:23. Defense of spiritual appetite. It also seems obvious to me that my species longs for reasons and a means of controlling our environment, and the reassurance that some loving super dad is nearby, keeping watch, protecting us from our neighbors and ourselves. So I think Christians are ultimately right when they say that humans have a God-shaped hole in our heart. But we also have a Twinkie-shaped hole in our throat. That doesn't mean that's what it's made for, or that that's the healthiest thing to fill it with. Maybe, just like our Twinkie hole, there's no right answer as to what is supposed to fill the God hole. There are some terrible things, for sure, but maybe it's good to satisfy our appetites with a variety of healthy options, and probably, occasionally, temporarily, try some less healthy stuff just for fun. Maybe for all our holes, the least healthy thing to do is decide what the one right thing is and only focus solely on that. Maybe, whether it's food or God or sex or connection, our appetites are never supposed to be satisfied for keeps. Maybe living with, managing, and indulging the appetite is just part of what it means to be human. Maybe this is why some people can seemingly live on Twinkie Jesus, while others endure devastating side effects unless they swear off him completely. All the young Christians look admiringly at the old Christians who have settled peacefully on their Jesus, and they long to have faith like that. Meanwhile, a host of logical fallacies will tempt them to ignore all the people who were destroyed by that exact same faith diet. This also might be why those who reject the Jesus-only diet still satiate their appetites with things like activism and MLMs and meditation and other cults. Granted, not all diets are healthy, but something is usually better than nothing, so long as you moderately follow your natural appetite rather than gorging on the manufactured versions, which are so much more alluring precisely because they don't require the work, the sugar your body doesn't have to break down, the social media that eliminates all the awkwardness of social reality, the porn that sidesteps the potential of relational rejection, and the fundamentalism that avoids all the existential angst and unknowns. Defense of the awesome, rad, supernatural. Obviously, there's infinitely more to life than we're able to take in as mere humans. We can't see most of the light spectrum. We can't hear most of the vibration spectrum. We can't smell the smells, or taste the tastes, or feel the feels. We're practically blind, deaf, and dumb, even within the 5 senses that we claim to, quote, have. And God only knows what other forces we can't sense at all. Here I find that the abhorrently godless atheist scientists once again expand my awe of God far more than my decades of Christianity ever did, even with its exclamation of a great big God and the addition of undetectable angels and demons. Astronomers look into practically infinite space and realize that the trillions of galaxies we could observe still make up far less than 10% of what we can detect but not observe. They call the unobservable stuff dark matter, even though it's neither dark nor matter, only because detectable, unmeasurable something-ishnesses was too hard to remember. In addition, they have asserted the existence of dark energy, a declaration they made in favor of the more honest, we don't know what the hell is out there, but we're fascinated. Note: seriously, I could go on all day about these topics I'm not qualified to write about. Dark matter and energy are just the tip of the iceberg. Nowadays, I can't spend 5 minutes on OpenSpaceProject.com or watch a space documentary without being struck by a level of awe I unsuccessfully strived to acquire for all my Christian years. I now wonder if Carl Sagan was a prophet from heaven, imparting to us the love of God and the keys to world peace. End of testimony. Back to my deconstruction. Within Christianity, we knew all the important things that God created because he told us right there in his book. Somehow, it wasn't until I left the Christian realm that I started hearing serious conversations about like 3-dimensional projections of higher dimensional objects, like the Tesseract or the Klein bottle. It's only outside of Christianity that I've found a true acceptance of how very little we perceive. In fact, we can only function because of our amazing ability to filter out the vast majority of stimuli within our narrow bands of perception. This is indeed the basis of many forms of autism, an inability to sufficiently filter. It's also the reason the world is infinitely explorable and that everything is fascinating if you look closely enough. So it's also the basis of object meditations and most psychedelic experiences, where the cognitive filters are reduced and the senses are overwhelmed with more stimuli than the brain can process, giving us deeply divine experiences on par with the Pauline vision or the authoritative voice of a burning bush. But even without altered states of consciousness, even if we could perceive reality, even if our brains weren't so small that they were absolutely mesmerized by children's toys like Mobius strips and gyroscopes and spirographs, even then, the rational brain is powerless against perception. This truth is perhaps most readily accessible even with the simplest of optical illusions, and that's just one of the senses that we supposedly have. Obviously, our heuristics are actually in charge, and no one gets to interact with pure reality. Note: our perceptions are usually not our choice, and our choices are almost always made at the emotional and instinctual level. That could also be why the religion that usually feels the most obviously rational to believe is the one that is prevalent where you were born and raised. You think you're thinking, but you're usually feeling, and it feels right to fit within the spirit of your community, to be included and to belong. Some would say that this spirit feels holy. Many more would say that that community feels divine. The weirdest visions in the Bible don't hold a candle to the otherworldly magic inside of atoms or the theorists' sketchbooks on quantum mechanics. So I tend to believe that most people who use the term metaphysical suffer from a lack of appreciation for the depth of the physical. Computers were metaphysical not all that long ago. The telegraph, the assembly line, air conditioning, indoor plumbing, almost every single aspect of our lives were undeniably black magic, like yesterday. We explore freaking space. We are the aliens. We are gods and magicians, at least to every human at every place on the planet at every point in human history. And the things our children will experience when we're gone would easily be dismissed as pseudoscience fairy tales today. We have no idea what metaphysical means, nor what supernatural is, because we know almost nothing about nature. So, to whatever extent the Christians are sure that we live among unseen forces in parallel realms, the scientists should be more so. And the best ones are. As Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I would add, any insufficiently understood phenomenon is indistinguishable from the supernatural. And since nature continues to reveal herself to be about the most unnatural thing imaginable, The atheist claim that there is no supernatural realm seems nearly indistinguishable from the religious claim that the supernatural realm is all around us, influencing us in ways we're not even aware. These days, I tend to think those are the same sentence. Defense of spiritual experience. I've experienced and done enough betrayal that I'm no longer putting much stock in human promises that include the word forever, not even my own. I don't know who I will be once I encounter the information and experiences that I don't even know are headed my way. But, for the moment, I would bet money that I will continue to stand behind my premise that this search for God is one of the most important human endeavors. But the worst place to look for it is in any institution that claims to have a monopoly on it. Though I'd be lying to myself and my audience if I denied the fact that I, like all beings, hope I'm right. To combat my sunk costs, I can only hope that my greatest pride is my dedication to curiosity over conclusion. As one of many examples, I think the modern worship service, despite my many musical objections to it, has a lot of fascinating, valuable qualities. To list a few, when congregants enter his presence, they accept his full acceptance, allowing themselves to believe they have infinite value and that someone could love them just the way they are, an experience many of them wouldn't have otherwise. That is something I would wish for all of humanity, not just fans of formulaic Jesus pop songs. Also, they sing and dance and release some of their inhibitions. For many of them, it's the only time during the week they do so. For many of them, they would never allow themselves that freedom unless a magical man in the sky encouraged it. So I'm glad for their sake that they believe that he does. Also, there's something amazing about congregational synchronicity, which I think much of the rest of the world is missing, save for the other deeply spiritual constructs like silent meditation retreats or Burning Man, which create eerily similar testimonies of spiritual experiences. Prayer would be another example. I used to pray to know God's will, to get his guidance, and to avoid bad things, and to acquire good things, to align with his will. Now, I pray to remind myself I'm not in control, that there's more out there than just me. That if this doesn't work out, it's neither because the world is conspiring against me, nor because God is disapproving of me. Sometimes life just sucks. And sometimes I just get lucky. I pray to prepare myself for both. Not my will, but yours be done. I mean it less religiously and more spiritually than ever. Defense of being wrong. Before germ theory, people thought that evil spirits made people sick, and they kept their distance for fear of being possessed by the same spirits. And, given the belief options at the time, either evil spirits make people sick or evil spirits aren't real, I think it was wise to believe in evil spirits because everyone who didn't believe in evil spirits was right and dead. Of course, there was another choice: to live as if evil spirits were real and still be skeptical that all the options are yet on the table. Likewise, pretending that the only options are Christianity or anti-Godism is just another false dilemma. My skepticism about Christianity does not diminish my love for the God that Christianity introduced me to. For example, Christians believe I'll be a better human when I search for God with my whole heart. I don't know if he exists, nor do I fully concede to the notion of actual soul-ish heart, but I still completely agree with them. Like the complex, largely chemical experience we call love, I don't think God's ethereal existence or non-existence has much bearing on his impact in our lives and our deep need for him. So, I wrestle with an authentic search for God, allowing my beliefs and my actions to disagree, just like I fully live out the charade that I have a mystical love for my family, even though I know my feelings are at least mostly chemical, because the heuristic seems more pragmatic than the alternative. And it seems I'm in good company. The father of the monotheistic faiths was Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, which means he who wrestles with God. So that is what I do, to the best of my ability, not pulling my punches with him, nor giving up my back to him. If there's a God, or a deep purpose, or a dragon lady in the sky, it seems like it rewards those who keep fighting. And they keep trying to tell us they want to reward us for the fight. Perhaps that's all God is, an invitation to an unwinnable fight, another unappeasable appetite, a recurring thirst. Unfortunately, the Bible promises exactly the opposite. Whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. I don't know if I disagree with whatever Jesus meant, But he either didn't say it, or he was wrong, or I don't understand what he meant. Because I really did my best to drink that water for 39 years. And yet, here I am. If I evaluate my position with more authenticity than hope-filled self-delusion, I'm still thirsty. I wish I could say otherwise, but this is honestly the best I can do. And it's going to have to be good enough for God for now, until he chooses to take advantage of my open mind and willing heart and perhaps make me a better Christian.